How's it going, Knicks fans? Welcome back to Fireside Knicks with your boys Alex and Ryan. Today we're talking about Paul George. Interesting reports coming out that the Knicks and Clippers are talking. Just a little talk, a little chat, a little fireside chat about Paul George and if he'd be a good acquisition for New York and maybe what a potential trade would look like. So we're going to discuss that, what Paul George would bring, his contract, who would be willing to give up for Paul George, and kind of what sequence makes the most sense here. Of course, it's kind of difficult to say because Paul George has been really injury prone over the past couple of years, but he's also a top 10 player in the league. You know, I think by most accounts people would agree with that. And I think Paul George, if healthy, would make this team a championship caliber squad. But again, if healthy is the primary thing here. So we're going to discuss that and everything about him. But Ryan, before we dive into the good stuff, how you do today, my friend?
I'm doing great. You know, I feel like the Knicks are in one of these spots where, we've been talking about this really since the start of this podcast, really coming into the fold. We're like, the Knicks are a star away, right? This team is really good in terms of their depth. They've got pieces in place. Brunson really took over this team and elevated this team into a serious playoff threat. And, you know, with Julius Randle on a bad ankle and really their shooting not doing anything for them, they were able to still get past the Cavs in 5 games and battle with Miami in the second round. So, you know, looking at what their ceiling is right now, I think you could say that as currently constructed, this team can win a playoff series, but you add a Paul George to this team and suddenly this team can go from just winning a playoff series to potentially being one of the best teams in not just the East, but in all of basketball, right? If you look at what, you know, the Knicks really need, it's shooting and defense. And Paul George is a great defender and a great shooter. So there are injury concerns. He is 33 years old. This isn't just a perfect player that, you know, there's nothing wrong with him and there's no reason to oppose a trade for Paul George. But in terms of what he provides when he's on the court, it's exactly what the New York Knicks need. And it's not a super long-term commitment. One of the big gripes I have with trading for a guy like Zach LaVine or previously trading for a guy like Bradley Beal is just the amount of money you have to commit to. Paul George is a free agent after 2024. You can choose to extend him on your own terms. You can wait it out and see how the season progresses. It gives you options to be flexible so that if next offseason a better opportunity presents itself, you can go and you can chase that. And I think that's important, right? Being flexible and especially in a league where things change dramatically year to year. Just 1 year ago, you know, we'd sit here and tell you the Knicks are a team that's rebuilding still, that's trying to find their identity, that we don't really know if this team can even make the postseason. And fast forward a year later, and now we're like, hey, if we get Paul George, can this team win the NBA Finals, right? You know, I know it may sound extreme, but, you know, realistically, how many duos are going to be better than Jalen Brunson and Paul George? If you're able to keep Julius Randle around, how would that work as a third option? You know, we know he's been a good playmaker in the past. We know that he's played more of a point forward role before. He can space the floor. You have Brunson, Randle, who aren't great defenders, but George is a pretty good defender. If you're able to keep Mitch and Grimes around, now you've got 3 really good defenders on the court. I've talked about the importance of giving Brunson and Randle good defenders around them. George would become probably the star of this team, if not the best player. But you know, one thing that's important, as I mentioned earlier with the injuries with George, if he needs games off, you have both Brunson and Randle. And a Brunson and Randle-led team is good enough to get you 48 wins in the 5th seed, right? So can a Brunson and Randle-led team with Paul George playing, let's say, 60% of the regular season games and really just saving himself for the postseason, those 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 extra wins, could that push you into the 3rd seed? Could that push you in a situation where now, you know what, you have to obviously beat the best of the East in order to get past. But we've seen teams like the Bucks fall early. We know that their struggles come with Giannis at the free throw line. The Boston Celtics are moving pieces around. They just acquired Kristaps Porzingis, so that team is still going to have to mesh together. We don't know how they're going to perform, and we've seen them underperform in the postseason. Philly, without Harden, like, how good are the Philadelphia 76ers, right? We could be in, you know, Embiid could get traded. We could end up sitting here talking about the Knicks have made contact about Joel Embiid. Like, they're in a weird situation. I think the Knicks are better than the Cavs. I think Miami's pretty good, but Jimmy Butler is another year older, and that team it's good, but can the Knicks elevate themselves ahead of them with Paul George? I think if you add Paul George to that series, I think that series goes differently. Maybe I'm wrong there. But I think you could agree with me overall, Alex, in the sense that, you know, if you acquire a guy like Paul George, you do so at the right price and, you know, you're able to fill out the roster with the pieces necessary, you know, depending on who you trade. I do feel like this team suddenly becomes, you know, maybe the 3rd best team in the East, right? I mean, again, I'm assuming Harden leaves, and if he doesn't leave, like, do you trust Philly in a playoff situation? I definitely don't. So, you know, it's the Celtics and the Bucks. Those are the 2 teams that you are the number 1 and number 2 in the East. But that 3 through 8 is all open. And if the Knicks acquire a guy like Paul George, they put themselves right in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, look, you kind of referenced the Phillies there, or rather the 76ers. And ultimately, when you look at kind of where their trajectory lies, Tobias Harris is drawing interest in the trade market. They want a ridiculous haul for him, which is crazy considering the fall off he kind of experienced. Joel Embiid could force his way out. James Harden's probably gone. I think, people have said he may go back to the Rockets. So you're looking at a Philadelphia 76ers team that could be gutted in a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And the Knicks are in a position to add, not to gut. So the question is, what are you willing to give up for Paul George, right? Paul George, as you mentioned, makes this team a lot better. He is a player that averaged nearly 24 points last season. He played 56 games. He was an all-star. He's been an all-star twice in his last 3 years, but he is 33 years old now. So, you're wondering, what can you expect from Paul George? He played 31 games 2 years ago and then 54. He hasn't played over 70 games since 2018. You're going to have to live with the probability that Paul George is going to miss a substantial amount of time every single year. And also, you have to look at his contract, right? Paul George is at the end of a 4-year, $176 million deal. So he has one more year, and then he has a player option in 2024. So the Knicks would have to be very worried that, okay, if we give up a sizable haul for Paul George, he may opt out of that contract in 2024 and look for another deal. But the reality is, I don't think he's given up $48 million, 49 almost million dollars on a player option. I think he's staying, especially if he's in New York with a window to win. He probably wants to win a championship. At least I would hope so, and have the opportunity to make $49 million. I don't know why he would exercise that player option unless the Knicks just completely flopped and he wanted to get out and maybe cash in one more time. But who's to say the Knicks don't extend him immediately and give him another couple years? Again, I don't think that's the best move because after that player option, 2024-25, he's going to be 35 years old as a unrestricted free agent. So, you ask yourselves, what is he worth right now with 1 year left of guaranteed play and then a player option where he could theoretically opt out? I don't think he will. Let's just say 2 years. Like, what is Paul George worth for 2 years of play, injury prone? You're gonna get value obviously in the playoffs if he's healthy. He's gonna make you a team that's capable of winning a championship. But Ryan, we talked about a couple players the past few days. Notably Obi Toppin and RJ Barrett. Who do you think you have to give up for Paul George? Because right now with his contract, his injury proneness, is there someone like you're looking? Because I'd rather have the star three. I'd rather have Paul George, Randall, and Brunson than Paul George, RJ, and Brunson because I just don't think I don't think it's enough. I don't trust RJ personally. People may disagree with me there, which is totally fine. I'd love to have a good conversation about it. RJ's been getting worse for 3 consecutive years. So, you tell me, are we expecting RJ to suddenly take that big step forward? I don't necessarily know. I think you need 3-star players to win championships in this day and age. You kind of look at, the Suns are putting together a super team. Of course, Miami has a couple. You got Bam, you got, of course, Jimmy Butler, and they just played tremendous defense. Jokic is another realm, and Murray had a great year. So, you're looking at some elite level players, like superstar caliber players. The Knicks, I'd say Jalen Brunson isn't relatively a superstar. I think he's like a high end star, like he's a tier 2 superstar. If you're going to go in with that kind of narrative. But, Ryan, what would you be willing to give up for Paul George? Because it's kind of a weird situation he's in, and the Clippers obviously may be interested in moving him.
Yeah, so one of the really important things that I think you mentioned there is just, can RJ Barrett take that leap? And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think Randall's the better fit for this situation. And that sounds crazy. Like, I see people say he didn't perform in the postseason, this and that. I understand it was brutal in the postseason. But I think the ankle surgery kind of confirms what we all thought. He was not healthy in that postseason. And I understand that, the 5 games against Atlanta, that does matter. And I understand that's part of the sample size here. That was also in a year where he was the offense. I feel like people forget that 2020 to 2021 Knicks team, Julius Randle was the offense. If Julius Randle was not going, and if they didn't have, number one, they didn't really have spacing, that wasn't a modern offense. It was really just, hey, just double Julius Randle and force him to pass and have one of his teammates do something. And, for the conversation about Randle's postseason struggles, Barrett struggled in that postseason too. And even this year, he shot below average in terms of true shooting percentage efficiency, and he did so on 19 points per game. So it wasn't super high volume, and his defense is still lacking, right? So, even looking at it from the perspective of, the Knicks lineup, like you mentioned, like the Brunson, RJ, Paul George trio, you again have to sit Quentin Grimes for that to happen. Because Quentin Grimes Grimes is not playing power forward. Paul George is not playing power forward. RJ Barrett's not playing power forward. So you need to acquire power forward. And, you know, Grimes is, again, the guy who took on the toughest defensive assignments in the NBA. Are you really going to ask Paul George, who we know has injury issues, to take on the toughest defensive assignments in the NBA and be the Knicks' second leading scorer? And before people say, well, RJ takes the load off of that, well, he can't really space the floor. So how much of the load can he take from that? And if you acquire a power forward, they have to be able to shoot. How many bigs can really shoot in this league? Not many. You know Mitch can't shoot, so you know that that's going to be part of it. And I'm not going to move Mitch, Randall, Grimes to just accommodate RJ Barrett. I think Grimes might just flat out be the better fit for this team, so I need him in that lineup. I need him to be the guy who the Knicks are relying on to give them defense. George should help alleviate some of the pressure defensively, and then you have the rebounding and physicality of Randall and Robinson. And Robinson, of course, is an excellent shot blocker. But as you mentioned, you know, one of the reason why Brunson doesn't really qualify as a superstar is mainly the defensive value. He doesn't give you anything. He's a big net negative on that part of the floor. And that's why you feel like pairing him with Paul George works really well, because Paul George helps you defensively, right? So if you put around Brunson, you know, Grimes, George, Randall, Robinson, suddenly the defensive assignments for Brunson get a little bit easier. The offense, you have three options that can all space the floor. Yes, you know, to an extent, these three guys do need the ball in their hands to work. But we've seen Randall and Brunson work really well together. And we saw them work with RJ Barrett, despite the fact that RJ Barrett isn't the shooter or scorer that George is. You're really just subtracting Barrett's shot attempts, giving them to George, subtracting Barrett's shot attempts, giving those to Randall, and then taking Randall's shot attempts and giving them to George. So it would give Randall an opportunity to still be a 20-plus point per game scorer. Paul George an opportunity to still average, you know, over 20 points per game, and the same thing with Brunson. And then the postseason, you figure out who's hot and who's not. So, you know, I think it's integral for the Knicks to still have Quentin Grimes in that lineup, or at least a 3-and-D guy. So it doesn't specifically have to be Quentin Grimes, but it has to be a guy like that. And that lineup doesn't work if you have RJ Barrett and Paul George there. So, end of the day, it's a positional fit, and I don't think the positional fit is there anymore. And as you mentioned, I don't know if he can take that leap.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're going to kind of find out over the next couple of weeks. Now, this is just a rumor, obviously, so we don't know if this will actually materialize into anything. But if he is available, Paul George obviously represents one of the better acquisitions that we can make, one of the better players that we can add to this, you know, young team that has some really good players right now. You kind of need it. Like, you need another guy that's going to demand double teams. You need another guy that can be a net positive defensively, and Paul George can certainly do that. I remember him killing us when he was at the Pacers a long time ago. So, you know, you really have to get a player that can elevate everybody, and Paul George certainly is that. So I'm curious to see what you guys think. Like, Paul George, certainly a name, certainly a really good one, certainly one that will elevate everybody and make this Knicks team substantially better, but it's yet to be seen. We'll see what happens. We'll see what direction the Knicks go, but they're not going to leave any stone unturned. They're going to do their due diligence. They're going to make sure they have all the knowledge possible, and they're going to make the step and the move that will best improve this roster as a whole. So obviously happy to hear your conversations and talking points below in the YouTube comments. As always, make sure to like and subscribe as always, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Knicks episode.